David Seymour on Q&A over the weekend. Let's just get into some of the questions. Jack Tame, this new truancy rules things they've got. Jack Tame's found the hole in it. There's really an easy way around that.
To stop a parent from just blaming illness.
A parent certainly could do that, and a lot of this is about what you might call soft power, or selling it to people. So better information about what really is illness, and when you sometimes can go, because we were told for several years that health comes above all else. It's often true, but not always. So we publish that guidance.
I mean, if you think about a parent though who's got a kid who's sitting around at home playing video games all day at the moment, and the parent for whatever reason isn't getting that kid to go to school, if the school then calls the parent and says, "Why is David or Jack not in school today?" There's nothing to stop the parent saying, "Oh, he's sick."
They certainly can, but I mean, I think you've got to be a bit cautious about stereotyping. These situations are so complex.
Did you hear that? They certainly can. So there you go. There's the whole truancy plan out the window with one sentence. So the people they're trying to get to are what they would describe as perhaps difficult students with difficult parents. If that's the makeup, if you've got parents who also can't give a shit about the authority, figure, then how's this going to help? The only way it's going to help is if then they have people turning up, Chewy. And that's the next step. Or forcing these people to go and get sickness, certificates from their doctors, of which they may not be able to pay for or afford. So that's where we're going. That's where they're going. Because actually, that's the only way the system will work. If they've got some kind of truancy Gestapo that then goes around and checks that all those children are actually sick, or else it just won't happen. It won't work like they think it's going to. It won't work anyway, but that's the only way for their system to be put in place. And I'm not using the word Gestapo to call them Nazis. It just seemed right at the time. I'm saying that because we're about to have a chat with Mehdi Hassan, who him and Piers Morgan agree that using those kinds of words aren't necessarily good. They're not the Gestapo because that's their politics. They're like the Gestapo because that's their politics. Anyway.
Complicated from what I've heard, talking to people in the last few months. So, for example, I talked to a youth aid police officer recently who has a collection, he tells me, of Xboxes and PlayStations that he's confiscated off children out of their homes. And I said, hang on, aren't you supposed to stop burglary? And he said, well, actually, the parents asked me to take them because the parents don't feel...
You know what? I don't believe that for a second.
I would like to speak to that officer.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second.
They want them to go to school. They don't feel they have the authority within their own home. They're literally asking him to play the bad cop. So, what we're doing here with the stepped attendance response scheme is we're saying the parents have obligations, the students have obligations, the school has obligations, and we as government and other government departments such as Oranga Tamariki and the police also have obligations. As a child's attendance gets worse, if it goes outside that 90% zone, then there's a stepped response at each stage here.
It just seems like a very...
There we go. So there's the first thing, Chewy. Truancy model, if the parent just goes, "Oh, Jack's sick," then the truancy model falls over. We'll keep trucking, because we've got a few to get through, because the next conversation, which I'm sure infuriates most people, is talking about school lunches.
School lunches. Documents released with the budget found the free school lunch program was super effective. Quote, initial findings indicate the program is having a profound impact on the well-being of learners. Profound. You then cut $107 million in funding from the scheme. What will your cuts mean for the impact of that program?
So a couple of things. First of all, if you want to get...
Very important question that he asked in the framing of the question. For the impact. He's talking about the impact of the scheme, not the cost of the scheme.
Down to really robust evidence, like really statistically, valid comparisons of schools that have them and schools that don't have them, and do more children come to school. The ministry did 5 different studies. One of them found that there may be a 1.6% improvement in children coming to school at a school that has the healthy school lunch program.
So that standard proof study found it was associated with improved attendance for some kids, which was equivalent to 3 days annually, which is substantial.
Well, if there's 200 days a year, then 1.6% is 3 days, isn't it?
Isn't that funny? How 3 days is substantial, but we've said this before, when they want to use the numbers in a certain way, they'll change the metric. So he's changed it to 1.6 rather than 3 days. Because, they're trying to keep people at school for all but 5 days a term. I know there's 4 terms, but 3 days is not insignificant to help kids stay at school. But that's not good enough for these guys because it's costing money and there's landlords to pay off. 3 days, not good enough.
I agree with that. 1.6% is what they found. Now, all I'd say to you is that if they really have, as you said, profound increases in well-being...
That's what your advice said, not what I said.
Well, it's not my advice. It's advice, I think.
Advice provided to you as the Associate Education
I get all sorts of advice.
It's a profound impact.
Oh, okay.
You do.
Should we give them some advice? This is this time where they actually ignore the experts. Remember how Nicola Willis was saying last week, I think it was around the ferries, wasn't it? Oh, we're just waiting for the experts to tell us. And they use experts to delay as an excuse. And then when they don't want to use them, which is every time they make a legislative change, they ignore the experts. So, yep, he's been given expert advice and he's like, look at that smirk, that rimmer smirk. Oh, yep, Yeah, we get lots of advice. I'm sure you do walking down streets in New Zealand. I'm sure you hear all sorts of pieces of advice, Chewy.
Oh, it was freely offered advice too.
Yeah.
Oh, where's it gone? Where's it gone? Great comment. Keep defending people who don't care if their children are in school. You guys are disgusting. Cole, we're just playing the video, buddy. But in this video, it features a libertarian going full nanny state. Someone who once said it's not the state's job to raise your children. Just a little bit of hypocrisy there. Just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah.
On the well-being
Yeah,
of
so,
learners.
so I mean, you got to sort of square the circle, right? Like some people say it's a profound impact, but it didn't even get a 2% increase in actually coming to school. If it was something was profoundly,
But no, see, it didn't say profound impact on attendance. It said profound impact on the well-being of learners.
No, I understand what you're saying, but my point is,
It's a broader impact, isn't it?
my point is that if something
Jack, I understand what you're saying, and your point doesn't line up with the narrative I'm trying to paint. So I'm going to minimize it and move on to my point now.
was profoundly improving your well-being, wouldn't you make more than a 2% effort to get it?
Well, my question is, what impact will your cuts to that funding have on the...
Possibly it's going to make it even better. I'm cautious about how I comment on this right now because as we speak, our excellent people on the expert advisory group are in negotiations with the providers, so I don't want to compromise their position. But all I'll say is that there's been a lot of interest. It's very competitive. It's amazing what you can do. I was even amazed at the quality of the offerings from the providers. And put it this way, we may well end up doing this at $3 a student. In fact, I'm pretty confident we will. I suspect we might actually get better product out of it. And previously, Labor were doing it at 8.
You were saying that word before about magic, Chewy. That magic word. That they're going to pay a lot less and the quality of the food's going to be better. This is magical world we live in. Do you think? Maybe they're going to go to the maybe they're going to the bowling green. Maybe they're getting all the meals delivered from the bowling green here in Dunedin. Maybe bowling club.
So again, he paints it like they always do. Is that Labor spent all the money for low quality meals when they could have just spent less money on high quality meals. What a bunch of fucking idiots.
Yeah.
Like there's so much, we've covered this so much with him talking about school lunches. The man does not know how to feed in bulk. And the fact that if you fed all the kids, you would be able to do it cheaper per head. You would also remove any stigma about poor children get free meals, non-poor children don't need to. And so you cast that social curse at people. He's completely brushed past the fact that it's good for learners to be fed, which is just some rock solid, like, did you not know this? And he's just focused on the fact that they couldn't bribe kids to school with a free meal. And somehow he's thinking by cutting it and lowering the quality and the per head price somehow, that the cheaper meal is somehow going to do it. What planet is this guy on? Does he even keep track of the threads that he's trying to weave?
All right, this clip's got 60 seconds. Let's get through it.
$8.61. Now, if they had introduced the model we're introducing 5 years ago, they could have saved nearly $1 billion and got the same result.
It wasn't always $8.61, just to be clear. It was between just over $6 and $8.61.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the point is we're saving $3 to $5.
Sure. But so back to that question, though, because I think you talked about the tendering process. Is there a risk that you will get worse outcomes by cutting funding?
Well, I think there was already a wide variety of outcomes, but what we're seeing in the
across the board, though, is there a risk?
Well, there's always a risk until you sign the contract and see the first lunch sign up.
So what is that risk? Talk to us about that risk.
Well, the risk is that people won't like the quality that they get. I mean, that is a risk. I'd be lying if I said that we can absolutely guarantee what's going to show up at the end of a tendering process, but every indication is that we can do as well or better with less money by being smarter. That's what every business, firm, farm, family in this country's had to do for the last 3 years. Now we've got a government that's doing it.
See how he muddies it, though? He says there's every indicator that we can do better with less money. And then he goes, every business, home, farm has had to do that for the last few years. He said we can do it better for less money. And then he said, and others have had to tighten their belts. They're not the same thing. He's not saying everybody else who did this had to save money and they all got better outcomes as well. So he's really kind of trying to, it's the shell game we talk about. He's selling the idea that they can do better on less, and then he's saying everyone else has had to pay less or spend less. But he's not saying all the other people who spent less are doing better, but they're going to. It's just it's an ultimate shell game. In fact, that's the end of the clip. It's up to there. I've got clips on the treaty principles to come from him, Chewy, but do you want to jump in with anything in between?
Yeah, look, I love that he's acknowledging that the quality might go down and that they might not like the quality that they get when he's talking about lowest common denominator slop that he wants to serve our young citizens.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the plan, personally, because then the next stage is, hey, look, we've spent all this money. We've been so generous and we've provided these meals, but there's so much wastage because it's fucking boiled polystyrene blocks and gravy, you know? And then he can just write off the whole thing as not being an effective program. David Seymour doesn't give a fuck about these kids unless he's Snapchatting them. Like the fact that he's associate education minister and this is the best that he's got, full nanny state, a mysterious community cop that seems to be hoarding Xboxes, and we can do more with less on the natural superiority of the right-wing party for feeding the masses is just such fairyland bullshit. I don't know why he didn't just burst into flame.
I'll tell you something that's worth keeping an eye on as well. It's a thing that I saw today, actually. There was a YouTube clip talking about some big YouTubers, KSI and Mr. Beast and Logan Paul, who are starting up a school lunches thing. And I'm just going to show you a freeze frame. I don't want to get kicked or anything, but there was a doctor who did this conversation, and there's this product out there at the moment called Lunchables, and these YouTubers are going up against them with a product called Lunchify or something like that. And the most interesting point, and this is worth keeping out, this is the product that's out at the moment, Lunchables, and he went through and he kind of worked out all the issues with it and what it was. But
heavily processed shit.
But the biggest thing he found was Lunchly. That's what it's called. Those Lunchly products are healthier than the Lunchables, but the most interesting thing is the sodium and the sugar and all those kinds of thing levels were below recommended, but they're only 300 calories. And the doctor points out children are supposed to get 650 calories at lunchtime. That's what they need for their bodies to work. So actually, if the meal doesn't give them enough calories, then their brains won't work well enough in school. So therefore, if you then made all these kind of processed shit meals sort of thing, if you made them all to the amount of calories using the formulas that these guys are doing, then you'd be having like double or triple the amount of sodium and sugars, because they can say there's X amount of sugar in this option, but what they're not saying is this option only gives you about 40% of the calories you need. So to actually have a meal made of this stuff to the correct calorie level you need, it would be 2.5 times what this is, and then that puts it off the charts altogether. And it made me think about school lunches here and about what they're going to do. Really, really, really careful to keep an eye on what they're offering, and not just what it is on a health scale to do with calories and sodium and all that kind of stuff, but what calories it has got, that it reaches the amount, not just how many salts and sugars and carbs and fiber that it's got, because it's got to be the right number of calories for a kid's brain to work through the rest of school as well. So that's just by chance I saw that today, and it's I'm intrigued by it. Indeed.
Just those three pitching a product at children just gives me the shits, as I'm sure their product will. They're just terrible people.
The next clip we're going to look to is we're going to get to a couple of clips now on the treaty principles. The first treaty principle was, the first conversation was Jack Tame talking to him about how treaty principles was supposedly a bottom line for you, but it's not going to go through. But it was a bottom line. What happened there?
So during the election campaign, you said a binding referendum on the treaty principles would be a bottom line in exchange for your party's support in government, an absolute top priority. And yet here we are, a year on, and the only way that we will have a binding referendum is if National agrees to pass your law, which the Prime Minister says explicitly and in the plainest language he will not support. So why do you capitulate on that bottom line?
Well, they also said that there was no way that they'd have any of it. I guess what you found is that you've got two parties, and I think Chris has said the same thing. Neither side's particularly happy with it because no one got everything they wanted. But critically, what we have allowed is...
This was your number one priority during the campaign. All of those people who supported ACT did so knowing that your absolute top priority was the bottom line was a binding referendum. And here we are, you're in government, and we don't have one.
Well, what we do have is a bill that is finally going to democratise what the treaty principle.
It's the wrong bill we want to hear about, Mr. Seymour. The bill is $4 million for this waste of time. That's the only bill that matters, to be frank.
Mean, because for a long time, unless you're a judge or on the Waitangi Tribunal or an academic or a public servant, you don't get much say on what our founding document means. For the first time,
I love that
What
statement.
the fuck?
Yeah, you don't get much say. Like, could you imagine in America if it was like, well, everyone of the public needs to decide what the amendments in the Constitution, if they should all decide. Like, you know what, Seymour, you're right. We don't all get a say on our founding document. It's a founding document between two parties. You don't get to rewrite the whole thing and have 5 million people sign off on it. It doesn't work that way. Shall we?
Yeah, I wasn't there. My name's not on it. I wasn't a representative of Queen Victoria either. I don't expect a democratic say in the Treaty of Waitangi. What a ridiculous position that is going to play well with his support.
Yeah.
But absolutely makes zero sense to anyone with even just a skerrick of a brain.
Yeah. All right, keep going.
We're going to democratise the debate on that. Now, is that as far as I'd like to go? No. Has it significantly changed the debate? Yes, and you can see that because of the reaction you're getting from all these people who don't want the great unwashed to be able to have a say about our constitutional future.
We'll talk about the process once the bill is introduced. What is the risk if we don't go through this process and have this debate?
I think the risk is that we increasingly adopt a version of the treaty which says it's a partnership between races. That's what the Court of Appeal said. It's what the Prime Minister...
It's a partnership between the Crown and iwi. The dog whistling he's doing, it's a partnership between races. So if one of the people who came across and agreed to it was Welsh and one was English and one was Scottish, they signed on behalf of the Crown, the Queen. They didn't sign on behalf of a race. And with the people who were already there, who were the owners of the land, it was an agreement between the owners of the land and the Crown. This dog whistling racial undertones of, I got to signed on based on race. It's just because they were different races doesn't mean it was an agreement based on race. If I moved to a foreign country, if I moved to India and wanted to start up a business, and I started up a business and I signed a document with a group there, a business there, it wouldn't be even though we were different races, it wouldn't be an agreement based on race. It would be an agreement based on the people who were there making the offer and me coming on board and saying, yes, I want to do this. Just this dog whistling is so revolting.
A version of the treaty which says it's a...
Sorry, Joe.
I was just going to say we've had a prime minister call us bottom feeders. We've had a deputy prime minister, or soon to be deputy prime minister, refer to most of us as the great unwashed.
Yep.
Is this just out the gates arrogance?
Yeah, and it's smarmy, and it's also, I think, what you're saying. One of the problems Seymour has now is getting re-elected, probably holding this government together once he becomes deputy prime minister, and trying to become the preeminent number 2 in the right to get rid of Winston. And so he's still speaking to his base and the base he'd like to attract for the next election.
Partnership between races. That's what the Court of Appeal said. It's what the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern repeated 35 years later, sorry. And as a result, we increasingly see ourselves not as human beings and New Zealanders with challenges and choices and problems to solve and overcome, and as we go through our lives, we see each other as Maori or non-Maori. And once you start telling people to think of each other in racial terms, the danger is people will start to actually do it. I feel to some extent they have, and our country's become more divided. I think it's important that we actually say, no, everyone's allowed to have a discussion about this. It's not going to be all terrible. Actually, New Zealanders can have a discussion about our constitutional future. We're going to have that discussion. Will it go as far as we like? Possibly not. On the other hand, as I've said...
You accept that now?
Well, it's possible that they won't, but I also just make the point that I think that this is going to be a lot more positive and uplifting than people believe. And once you see where it gets to, people say, we actually can have a say in our constitutional future. It might end up being a more popular idea than some people expect.
How much is...
I do not think so. One other clip that I want to share with you. I don't know what that one is. Oh, yeah, that's the Gaza one. And this last clip is about treaty principle. Well, basically, it's only, it's under 2 minutes. Why even bother? Like, why bother doing this? It's you know what? We don't need to play that because I'll give you the answer. You know what? I'll give him credit. His rationale for why bother makes a logical conclusion and sense. He says, why bother? And his answer to that is, well, we could have said that about when Michael Laws brought out the assisted dying bill like 20 years ago, but that started a conversation what's gone into making that law. That's the pitch he's making. He's basically stealing the Green Party manifesto, where you ask Julian Genter, and I have done this, why, you want affordable quality housing as a right, and she does say, well, it's an aspiration for maybe 20 years from now. That's what he says. Why bother? Because it's an aspiration, and maybe in 20 years from now, it'll be a change. I think that's all we need to get from him, because that's what the whole last clip is, and we've got more to get to, Chewy. But yes, sir, you welcome. Jump in if you want to say anything to do with this so far.
It's great to see David Seymour be a twat on 3 subjects all at once. But I think the most egregious thing here is the positioning that he takes around this reframing of the treaty principles. That this laughable notion that we need everyone in this country to have a democratic say on a treaty that was signed between the Crown and the Indigenous people of
the landowners,
this place,
people who were here first,
is laughable. Like, I think he's panicking, because the longer this goes on, there is more understanding amongst the general public now about let's say the treaty just as a catch-all, but we're really talking about Titiriti. If someone like me all the way down here in the South Island could learn that actually there are 2 treaties and it isn't a direct translation, and under international agreement it's the one in Toreo that is the important one,
the Indigenous
that's
language,
the one that most people signed, then it can get through to any numbskull out there about what we're talking about. But
unless they're being disingenuous. If they're being disingenuous, it won't get through. Anyone who chooses to participate in this conversation as an honest actor, let me put it to you this way: if someone from Indonesia signed a contract with someone from France, right, and it was the Indonesian company wanting to say something to the French company, and they wrote the agreement both in Indonesian and in French, the French people are going to understand and sign the French version, because that's what they understood. No difference. In the treaty, both versions, Māori and English, Māori understood the Māori version. The English one, whilst it is a historical document, is basically a paperweight when it comes to law, because that's not the one that Māori understood. Māori understood the one that was in Māori. So that's why that carries more weight. Sorry, Troy.
And just historically, that's the reason why the one in Māori is the one that has the most signatures. There's about 50 signatures on the English translation, and that's purely because they ran out of room, and they just basically said, yeah, this is the same thing. Okay, and then we threw it away and let rats chew on it. That's how important it was. It got colonists in the doors, and that's all that matters. But now David Seymour wants to put it up as this is something we should all have a say on. And I think the most dangerous and malicious thing that he's doing here is he's going after immigrants to this country that have zero understanding of this.
Yeah.
And going, if you don't go along with me, you're a second-class citizen to the Māori. Which is just such a bald-faced fucking lie. But he knows that that's where he'll get numbers. What he's scared about is the generations that are coming through school now with a greater understanding of New Zealand history than we have ever had. And he knows that if he leaves it for another generation, there is no way that this is going to fly. You cannot put race relations in this country to a fucking referendum, which is what he wants.
Yeah.
You just can't do it.